All right, we're live. We good? All right. Hey guys, how's it going? My name's Zach. I'm a Drupal developer. I work for Isovera. We are a Drupal shop based out of Boston. I've been working remotely here for about 4 months now, so it's nice to be in Austin. And tonight we're going to talk about configuration management in Drupal 8. So before we start, I think we should just define what configuration management is. And configuration management basically means taking control of your database in order to reliably manage change in your application. So you're going to spend a lot of time and money probably building your website, right? And after you launch it, you don't want to just you don't want to leave it up there to gather dust, right? You need to take care of it, probably fix bugs, introduce new features, new functionality. So in order to do that, you're going to have to make changes, right? So there's a good metaphor that actually I got from my boss. He said, making changes to a live website is kind of like changing the tire on a car while it's still rolling. It can be difficult, especially with an application like Drupal. It's composed of 2 parts traditionally, right? You have your code and you have your database. So in order to reliably manage change and introduce new features to change things, basically, you're going to need to manage the state of both your code and your database. So luckily, managing the state of your code, that's the problem that's been solved for a long time. We have version control systems like Git. Unfortunately, the same is not true for your database, right? You can't directly version control your database. If someone knows a way to do that, feel free to let me know, because that'd be awesome. But otherwise, we have configuration management to do that. And so what configuration management allows you to do is to export the state of your database to code so that it can be managed by a version control system along with the rest of your application's code. And that's pretty cool, right? It gives us a lot of benefits. It's valuable because it lets you easily deploy database updates along with the rest of your code in a reliable manner, so you can test it up through your stack, right? Dev, test, prod. You know what's going to happen because you've tested it before you put it on your live site. Also, you're never going to lose changes to your database because its history is managed by a version control system. So if something's going wrong on your live site, you can kind of, well, theoretically, you could roll back. I don't know if that'd be so easy in practice, but. All right, so basically, if you're using configuration management, you're essentially putting your database under version control. Not exactly, but it's close enough, I think, for now. All right, so before we talk about Drupal 8, I think maybe we should talk a little bit about Drupal 7 so that we can understand how awesome the config management system in Drupal 8 is. So in Drupal 7, it was actually possible to manage configuration. You would do that through contributed modules such as features or StrongArm. There's others, but those are probably the 2 most popular. And those solutions treated us well for a long time, but they definitely had their shortcomings, right? So in Drupal 7, there's no centralized API that modular theme developers can use to expose their configuration. You had 2 kind of de facto ways that arose, which was to use the Entity API exportables or CTools exportables. And there's not really a good reason for there to be two ways to do this, at least not one that I can think of. There should just be one centralized way, and that's what we have in Drupal 8, so that's really cool. Also, the features module was not designed to act as a centralized configuration store for your site. It was really designed to bundle up small pieces of site functionality and move them from site to site. So the classic example is an image slider, right? You could just make your image slider, bundle it up with features, and then push that out to all your different sites. Beautiful. But again, it's not designed to do what the configuration management system in Drupal 8 does. And because of that, we run into some problems. When you're using features to manage configuration in Drupal 7, your configuration oftentimes just gets spread out between multiple configuration modules. It's not very organized. It's kind of crufty and messy, and I don't know. You can run into things like features modules with interlocking dependencies. That makes updates really difficult sometimes. Also, I don't know if anyone's ever used Drush to disable a module that's required by features. If you did that on your live site, well, your features module is going to get disabled. There goes a lot of your configuration, and it's not good. Also, So the way that features stores configuration, it just ends up making these huge long files. And so if multiple developers are working on a site at the same time, probably making commits to the features module, you're going to get these nasty merge conflicts that really, really suck to debug and to resolve. So in Drupal 8, a lot of these problems are addressed, right? There's no more spreading out a configuration between multiple modules. We have one configuration store where you can put everything. There's no more questions about that. Let's see. Oh, also there's the centralized config API in Drupal 8. Yay, no more guessing about how you should do it. Also, there's just less potential for merge conflicts, at least in my opinion, because the Drupal 8's configuration management system spreads up or breaks up your configuration into a bunch of little YAML files instead of trying to stuff it all into one huge file. Yeah, so as a side note, features is not dead in Drupal 8. It's still around, but actually I think it's alive and better than ever because it's able to do what it was actually designed to do in the first place. All right, so I'm going to show you a little demo of the config management system, but first I think it'll be helpful to understand like what is actually considered configuration in Drupal 8. So in order to do that, like let's talk about the 4 main categories of data that there are in Drupal 8. And also feel free to like stop me at any time if you have questions or you don't agree with what I'm saying. So first and foremost, we have content. I mean, anyone that's ever worked with Drupal or seen a Drupal site knows what content is. It's information that's meant to be displayed to your end user, such as images, files, whatever, press releases. And as a technical note, content is stored and accessed through content entities. Next, you have state. This is information of a temporary nature. Usually it's machine generated that describes the state of your website. Good example would be the last time that cron ran. And so when I was first like learning about the config management system in Drupal 8, I had a little bit of trouble differentiating state from configuration. So I just put a few rules in here to help you understand what I'm talking about here. So if the data that you're looking at is specific to the individual site that you're looking at, that you're working on, and you're never ever going to want to deploy that data between multiple sites, you're probably dealing with state. A good way to think about it would be that if you were to reset your system, you're going to lose all of your state, and that's okay because it's not vital to like the functioning of your application. But your configuration is persistent. It's going to stay around because it is vital. You need it. All right. Next, we have session. This is information about an individual user's interaction on the site, such as like whether or not they're logged in. This is pretty much state, except it's like stored and accessed in a different way in Drupal 8, so it's technically separate.
Can you address,
Sure.
compared to this, ways that you were doing similar things to the extent that those similar things were capable in 7?
Yeah, sure. So you could do a lot of the same things in Drupal 7, right? But you would do so using the features module, and so it's a different set of commands basically,
And as to your point, you could use the features module to do that in 8 as well, but it is kind of using that module for not what it was originally intended to be created for. And this is the opportunity then to not do that.
Right. I think you could use features to do that in Drupal 8. I actually haven't tried that. I think it would depend on whether or not the individual modules like expose their configuration in a way that features is looking for. That's a good question, though. Okay, and so lastly, we have configuration. Information on your site, usually it's human edited, and it's meant to be semi-permanent, and it's vital for your application to function properly, so it needs to be deployed from your different environments. And examples of this would be like the name of your site, content types, or views in Drupal 8.
You could almost break configuration into 2. Because content types are really structured,
Yeah.
not actual data in tables. It's the table itself. I would consider that more of a structure role,
Yeah.
Than an actual content.
That's a fair point. I think what I'm talking about more is just like things that Drupal considers to be configuration. So things that you can manage through the configuration management system. But yeah, that's a good point. So now I think maybe we can just take a look at configuration management in action real quick. So here I have 2 sites running locally here. One is my dev site.
Will you make it bigger a little?
Oh, is it tiny?
Plus, I just.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
2 rows back, but I'm happy.
How's that?
That's better. Thank you.
Oops. No worries. I'm just clumsy.
Ta-da.
Cool. No
I
worries.
think you need to expand it again.
Okay.
One more.
Oh.
All right. So we have a dev site here, configdemo.dev, and we have our production site. We don't need test. No one needs to test. So let's make these. And oh yeah, by the way, these sites are exactly the same right now. So I think we should probably update the name of this site because that's not good for SEO. We need a catchier site name. Here we go. And we should probably also have some content types. I think we should make a press release content type. And probably give it an image field, because all press releases need images. All right, so there we just made at least 3 changes to our configuration, right? We changed the site's name, we added this press release content type, and we added a field to that content type. So Drupal 8 actually lets you inspect your configuration through the UI, which is kind of nice. Where is it here? Config synchronization. All right, so here we're getting this message saying like, okay, we've taken a look at what's in your database, and it differs from what's on your file system or what's in your config sync directory. These are the things that are different, and if you want, you can actually view the diffs, which is really cool.
I have a question, Tom.
Yeah.
Am I remembering right or not? I think on the naked install, don't you have to export it and import it before you can see the diffs?
Yeah, so I've already done that.
Yeah, if people haven't ever done it before, you're like, where the hell are the changes?
That's a good point. Yeah, so you need, before you're going to see any of this, you do need to export the baseline configuration when you install your site. But we can take a look at that in a second. All right. Let's see. So if you want to do this all through the UI, you could just hit export here, and you're going to download this tarball of all of your site's configuration, just basically a dump of your active configuration. I'm not going to do it that way, but you can if you want. You can also edit single configuration items, which is kind of cool. I feel like you probably shouldn't do this, but it does give you the option if you really wanted to. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. All right. So now I'll just open the command line here. Can you guys see this? Sort of. All right. So you can manage your config through the UI, but I think a better way to do it, especially if you're going to be using a version control system, would be to do it using Drush. And you do that with so right now I'm exporting my active configuration. All right, look at that. It's gonna say like, okay, these are the new things that you're gonna be doing. Mostly I'm creating things, updating this one file, but if I was gonna remove things, it would warn me that I'm about to delete some configuration. So that looks great. Let's export it. Okay. Now we can check. All right. See, now we have all these untracked files. Got a really descriptive commit message. And then push. Okay. So now we're ready to import this stuff on our production site. Just so you can see before we do it, the site name not changed, exact site versus it's actually a really great site. All right. Config.prod. Now we're telling, can I see that? Yeah. We're telling Drush to import what's the configuration on our file system to our active config store, which in this case is the database. There we go. Oh, no new, oh, yeah, I forgot to pull. All right, look at that. That all looks good. All right, now if we did this right, we should see the site name on production update. Here we go. I don't know if you guys can see that. Also, we should see our new press release content type, which we do. Awesome. So, I mean, that was a really simple example, but I mean, I think you could probably understand like the value of that, right? Especially like, let's say you're going to configure a really complex view. You probably don't want to repeat that step on each environment. You might make a mistake. It's going to, it's going to be time consuming. I think this is a better way to do it. I can show you some more examples in a second, but so now let's talk about some things you should probably know about the content configuration management system in Drupal 8. I'm just going to call it CMS from now on. I'm not talking about content management system, configuration management system. Anyway, so the CMS is only designed to move configuration between different instances of the same site in Drupal 8. Okay, and what that means, the way that Drupal identifies a site is by its UUID, or Universal Unique Identifier. So whenever you run through the Drupal 8 install script, it's going to generate a UUID for you. And so what this means in practice is that you need to set up all of your new sites from database dumps of your original site or from an existing site. And that's going to make sure that your UUIDs match. I can tell you that when I first started using the config management system in Drupal 8, I didn't do this, and I was really confused about why it wasn't working. It made no sense. Then I went back. This was the reason. Let's see. All right, so I think you've heard me talking about configuration stores a little bit, and that's a good thing to know about in Drupal 8. So we have this concept of configuration stores, and when you first install Drupal 8, your active configuration store is the database, and what active means is basically just where your site's pulling its data from, right? So you can think of it this way too. When you export your configuration from your active store or your database, you're exporting it to your file system usually. So from one store to another. Another interesting point about this is that the active configuration store is configurable. So you could switch out your database for something else, another backend like Redis or Mongo, or I believe you can even set it up to read directly from your file system. I don't really know why you'd want to do that, but I guess you can. All right, so another interesting quirk about the CMS is that sites own configuration, not modules or themes. And so basically, if you take a look at most modules, you're going to see a config install directory or a config optional directory. And in those directories, you're going to find a bunch of YAML files that provide that module or that theme's default configuration. Once you install that module or that theme, the module is no longer in control of that configuration. This site has taken that over. And to kind of prove that, you could go in and edit the default config for a module or a theme. and it's going to have no effect on your site after it's already installed. Like, you could just delete it and it wouldn't do anything. The only way to actually make changes to a module or a theme's configuration after it's been installed is to write an update hook. Or I guess you could uninstall and reinstall the module if you wanted. All right, this is, yeah.
Could you say that again?
Sure.
You said the only way to modify a module's theme or configuration after installation is to write up there.
Mm-hmm. So that'd be more for if you're like writing your own module. You'd have to worry about that, or a theme.
So if you have a custom module and once it's installed on the site and the site configuration management is in control, can't you edit the YAML and the site configuration that is controlling that module?
Yeah, so you could go into your site's configuration store and edit it there.
You can change it there instead of writing an install hook, right?
Yeah, okay, you could do that. But if you were to do that, then like, yeah, so that would work for one instance of a site, but that wouldn't necessarily be like reproducible. Like if you were going to move that module to a new site, you'd have to remember that you edited that config file.
Sure.
And if you do that, if you have config for a custom module, you need to make sure you make a dependency on that module. So if you uninstall it, you can reinstall it.
Yep.
Otherwise, it'll bitch at you and give you an error and say, I've already got this config. Don't give it to me. Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, so next point is that in Drupal 7, all variables, and by variables I mean like items in your variables table in your database, were global. Like if you've ever used the vset or vget functions, all you had to do was give it a variable ID and you get back the value of your variable. In order to make that work, all variables are global in Drupal 7, and what that means is they're loaded into memory on every page load, which isn't like super efficient, I guess. And in Drupal 8, they're only loaded when they are needed, which is kind of nice. Okay, real quick, I'm not going to go too deep into configuration entities, but just so you know, there are two types of configuration. You have simple configuration. Let's see, the important point about simple configuration is that there can only be one instance or one copy of each configuration item, kind of like your site name. You're not going to have multiple of those. So then you have configuration entities, which are new in Drupal 8. And these allow you to store more complex data. And a good point about them is that you can have multiple instances of the same configuration entity. So an example of that would be like content types or views, image styles, what have you. Yeah, so we just talked a little bit about dependency calculation, but I'm not going to go too deep into it because I feel like that's a rabbit hole that you just need to read up on your own. Wouldn't be very effective for me to talk about it here. But basically, Drupal 8 will try to calculate your dependencies. And I can actually show you an example of that. If we go into our dev site here, where are we? Content types. All right, so let's say we don't want this body field on our article content type for some reason. So we see here what Drupal's actually done is saying like, okay, I'm not just gonna let you delete this. I'm gonna warn you first that this action is gonna be affecting these configuration items. So take a look at these and make sure this is actually what you wanted to happen. Yeah, I'm not gonna do that, but that's an example of Drupal calculating dependencies. All right, so next we have a few tips that I just want to share with you guys from having used the config management system in Drupal 8. So I think this is the most important tip that I have, and it's that by default, when you import your configuration, like that's a destructive action. So anything in your active configuration bin that's doesn't exist on the file system is going to be destroyed. So you want to watch out for that, and we could see an example of that by doing this. We can add another field to our article content type on prod. So you'll add a list. All right, so now we've updated the configuration on our production site, but that configuration is not reflected in our code. So let's say we've been doing some development, and we've added some new configuration. We're ready to move that to prod, but this change, since we made it directly on prod, is not in there. So we're on prod here. We're going to import our new changes, which there are none, so we'll just see. All right, so you see here that field that we just created is going to be deleted because it's not actually represented in our code. So basically, it's important to move configuration up your stack like carefully. And there's actually a module out there that'll help you do this. You can prevent any configuration changes in the UI using, let's see.
Is there a way to import partial config? Or is it all or nothing?
Yeah, sort of. We can actually, that's actually my next point. That's good. So if you want to get around that, what you can give Drush the partial flag. And basically what that's going to do is not delete those things that aren't reflected in your code.
But if I have 4 developers working on my site and 3 of them created new content types and only one of those content types is ready to get moved, can I pick and choose just that content type?
Yeah.
This is where features was good, is you could really target what you were moving as opposed to, I just want to sync my 2 sites and grab it all,
So you can do that. I think about the best way to facilitate that would be to stress to your developers that you should be committing small chunks of config at a time. It's if you've just created your content type, just export that config right away. And so you have that one commit. And if you only are ready to move up that content type, you can just cherry pick that one commit or merge it as you see fit. But if you're just gonna, so if you don't do that, it's a lot harder because then you're gonna have to look through all these tiny YAML files and figure out what you need.
I mean, with version control, I can just say put it on branch.
Sure.
And I could ignore that branch for as long as I want.
Right.
But I can't do that with.
Well, so you can do that if but you have to be sure that you're exporting. You have to be careful about when you're exporting, basically, when you're committing. So I think it is confusing at first, but once you get used to it, it's manageable.
Okay.
So another thing that I ran into during development, you're going to have modules that you only want going during development, like devel. You never want that. You never want that module to make it into your production site. And so when you run config export locally with devel, you're going to get all of devel's config into your sync directory, which you don't really want. There's no need to have it there. So what you can do is pass config export this skip modules flag, and it'll skip that modules configuration. All right. So another thing that you can do is by default when you run through the Drupal install script, it's going to make this entry in settings.php. It's going to set up your config sync directory. It puts it under sites default files config and then your really long UUID. The reason it does that is for security reasons, right? You might have some sensitive information in your config sync folder, considering it's your database settings, that you wouldn't want people to see that, basically. And so they obscure it by putting it at this really hard to guess directory location. So that works. But you can also change that. You can tell Drupal wherever you want your sync directory to be. And so a lot of the projects that I work on, we version control one level above our web server, or sorry, one level above our doc root. And so you can actually put your sync directory up above your doc root, and then you'll never have to worry about your configuration items being served by your web server. All right, last but not least, don't blindly trust the config system. It is really nice and it does work really well. But at the end of the day, it's still up to each module's maintainer to implement the API correctly. And there can be bugs. I've definitely run into them, and they will break like if you have one bug in one of your config items, you can't import anything. So be careful. Usually nothing catastrophic, like you can figure it out, but it is annoying when it happens. All right, and so that's most of my talk. I have listed out some like useful configuration related modules for Drupal 8. We don't have to go through them right now. I guess the one that I mentioned where you can lock down configuration changes in prod or in any environment that you choose, it would be configuration read only. That's a pretty nice one. I'm gonna make these slides available. They're on my GitHub account. I'll give you guys the link so you can go back and check if you want. I also have my sources, so just like a bunch of articles and documentation on the config management system. Definitely worth a read if you're trying to learn more. And that's pretty much it. So, does anyone have any questions?
For read-only config, have you done a lot of stuff with that, or just?
I haven't really. So I'm just finishing up my first like Drupal 8 site, and that's going to be like my last step is to set that up.
Have you heard of any way where you can like lock down everything except like this one thing?
I have not. I have not. That would be cool though. Maybe a pull request. I don't know.
In your work environment or your workflow, how many servers are you dealing with in your production?
Usually 3. Usually just dev, test, prod, and then local. But that depends. Like sometimes we'll have a few like feature branch environments if we want to test a certain thing.
So when you're dealing with dev, and you have team, that's not uncommon for every dev's dev to be different.
Sure.
And I can see where you would do config partial to bring your stuff up to staging or test,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe a full sync to production from there.
Yep.
But how about bringing stuff back down the other direction?
Yep.
What if I want to bring something that's on staging test back down to my local dev, go do a config partial and go backwards with it, or I mean, how does that work in the other direction?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't cover that. So basically what I do is I drop my local database. I make sure there's nothing in there that I need first, and then I delete it, and then I sync with the test database or wherever you're trying to pull from. And then as long as your code is up to date, so as long as what's in your config sync directory is up to date within that new database,
Okay.
You'll be good.
Okay.
But yeah.
But it's just this tried and true old manual process that we'll do for.
Yeah, it's a learning curve.
Okay.
Sorry, my throat's dry. I don't have any water.
Very good.
Any other questions? No? All right. If you want the slides, you can get them here. If you want the Git repo where the slides are at, you can get it there too.
We'll post a link on Meetup comments too.
Yeah, that works. And also,
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, go
Keep
ahead.
going. No, I can wait
Oh.
till you're.
this is it. Just if you want to follow me on Twitter. I don't really tweet that much, but
So whenever I was trying to do this from the beginning, one of my big problems was actually trying to get, trying to move from the 7 way of, I've got this config where I just spin up a new site, and having config live in something like a theme, which it can, for an initial install or a custom module that's mine for custom installers. Do you use, what is it, config installer? Have you used that module?
I haven't.
It may be a little, I mean, is there another way? My biggest problem was getting some config, and I didn't want to clone the database. I wanted a new site. And so that, yeah, that's kind of hard to do the first time.
Right.
Do you have any advice about that?
So you can use config installer, but I haven't used it. But from what I understand, it like puts everything into a distribution, right?
It makes it a profile.
A profile, okay. So I don't know. That doesn't seem like super ideal. I don't have any good advice for that.
I was curious. Well, yeah, I mean, I know that way works, but I didn't know if there was another way. Maybe you knew. Cool.
I think features is still available available for Drupal 8, so you can probably use features for that.
I tried, and it really got me lost. I was used to using it in 7, and it certainly is good for what it's intended for in making components and things, but trying to get all of your configuration, everything into a feature is,
Yeah, there's no strong arm or stuff.
it's not very much fun. Yeah.
So when I first started, and I ran into this issue where basically I think there's some activity in Drush that will, or I was reading through an issue queue that was basically saying that you could more or less like delete the UUID portion of your config files, then swap it out with your new site's UUID. Theoretically, everything should just work.
It works on some config objects. So
Okay.
things like custom blocks and things that are kind of straddling one's content. I think I've found it to be more cantankerous, but it could just be me.
Yeah.
I could just do it wrong.
I think it's like, honestly, I think it's kind of a new space. And I think a lot of people are trying to figure it out, like definitely me included.
Clone and delete all content.
Yeah.
You know, it's like- yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.